She thought she was protecting her neighborhood when she called the police on a black man minding his business in the park. She accused him of being suspicious and wouldn't leave him alone. But when the officers arrived, the truth she learned left her speechless. This man wasn't who she thought he was, and what happened next was nothing short of justice served. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. You won't believe how this story ends. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sun filtered gently through the golden leaves, and the air carried a chill that made you pull your jacket a little tighter. The local park was bustling with activity, dog owners strolling with their pets, joggers weaving through the paths, and a few parents watching their kids on the playground. Among the morning regulars was Officer Marcus Reed, a 34-year-old detective with a calm demeanor and an athletic build. Today, Marcus wasn't wearing his uniform. It was his day off, and like every other Thursday morning, he had decided to take a walk through the park before heading to his favorite coffee shop. He loved these quiet moments, a chance to clear his mind and enjoy some solitude away from the stress of his job. Dressed in a simple hoodie and sweatpants, Marcus carried a small backpack slung over his shoulder. He paused at a bench near the pond, pulling out a notebook and pen. Sketching was one of his hobbies, a way to decompress after long days in law enforcement. As he began outlining the trees reflected in the water, he was unaware of the trouble brewing nearby. A few yards away, Karen Whitaker, a middle-aged white woman with short blonde hair and a sharp, judgmental gaze, was walking her small terrier. Karen prided herself on keeping an eye on the neighborhood, often inserting herself into situations she believed warranted her concern. She had lived in the area for years and considered herself the unofficial watchdog of the park. Karen's eyes narrowed when she spotted Marcus sitting on the bench. To her, his presence didn't fit the profile of the park regulars she was used to seeing. He wasn't walking a dog or jogging. He was just sitting there, scribbling in his notebook, wearing a hoodie that made him look, in her eyes, suspicious. Karen clutched her phone tightly as she walked past Marcus, her terrier yapping at his heels. Marcus glanced up briefly, offering a polite smile before returning to his sketch. That momentary acknowledgement only seemed to fuel Karen's paranoia. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp. Marcus looked up again, his expression calm, but slightly confused. "Yes." "What are you doing here?" Karen asked, her gaze darting to his backpack. "You've been sitting here for a while." Marcus raised an eyebrow, taken aback by her accusatory tone. "I'm sketching," he replied, holding up his notebook. Karen's eyes narrowed further, clearly not satisfied with his answer. "This park is for families and locals," she said pointedly. "You don't look like you're from around here." Marcus sighed, closing his notebook and leaning back on the bench. "Ma'am, I'm just enjoying the park like everyone else. Is there a problem?" Karen didn't back down. "Well, you seem out of place," she said, her voice lowering slightly but no less condescending. "Do you live around here?" Marcus's patience was wearing thin. "I don't think I need to explain myself to you," he said evenly. Karen's face flushed, her indignation bubbling over. "If you have nothing to hide, you wouldn't mind answering a simple question," she snapped. "People like you make others uncomfortable when you lurk around." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I'm not lurking, ma'am. I'm sitting in a public park, minding my business. Have a good day." Karen stood there for a moment, clearly fuming. Finally, she yanked her phone out of her pocket. "Fine," she said. "If you won't leave, I'm calling the police. Let's see what they have to say about this." Marcus watched her dial the number, shaking his head in disbelief. He had dealt with people like Karen before, people who made baseless assumptions and acted on their prejudices. But it didn't make the situation any less frustrating. It didn't take long for two police officers to arrive at the park. Karen waved them over as if she were greeting old friends, her terrier yipping excitedly at her feet. "Officers," she called, her voice filled with urgency. "Thank goodness you're here. That man over there has been acting suspiciously." One of the officers, a tall man with a calm expression, approached Marcus while the others stayed back to speak with Karen. Marcus remained seated, his hands resting casually on his knees. "Morning, officer," he said, his tone polite but firm. "We got a call about some suspicious behavior," the officer said, glancing at Marcus's backpack. "Would you mind telling me what you're doing here?" Marcus gestured to the notebook on the bench beside him. "I'm sketching," he said simply. "That's it." Karen, overhearing their conversation, chimed in from a distance. "He refused to tell me who he is. He's been sitting here for hours, and I don't think he belongs in this neighborhood." The second officer walked over, clearly annoyed by Karen's interruptions. "Ma'am, we're handling it," he said curtly. Marcus took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the officer's scrutiny, though their demeanor was far more professional than Karen's had been. "Do you need my ID?" he asked calmly. Before the officers could respond, Marcus reached into his backpack, not for his wallet, but for something far more significant. He pulled out his leather badge holder and flipped it open, revealing his police badge and ID. "My name is Detective Marcus Reed," he said, his voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I'm with the city's police department, and I'm off duty today." Karen's face turned ghostly pale as the realization hit her. She stared at the badge in disbelief, her self-righteous confidence crumbling. "Wait, you're a police officer?" she stammered. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his tone calm but pointed. "And for the record, sitting on a park bench isn't a crime." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions neutral, but clearly understanding the situation. One of them turned to Karen, his tone firm. "Ma'am, there's no issue here. Detective Reed isn't doing anything suspicious." "But he," Karen began, her voice faltering. "Ma'am," the other officer interrupted, "you called us here over nothing. This could have been avoided if you hadn't jumped to conclusions." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked at Marcus, who simply shook his head, his expression a mixture of disappointment and exhaustion. As the officers turned their attention back to Karen, Marcus took a moment to collect himself. Despite her actions, he wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of having to prove himself, tired of assumptions based on his skin color, and tired of encounters like these that were far too common. But this time, he had an opportunity to say what needed to be said. Marcus stood up slowly, towering over Karen, who now looked smaller than ever. "You see this badge?" he said, holding it up. "It means I swore an oath to protect and serve everyone. People like you, people like me, everyone. And yet, here I am, having to defend myself for sitting in a park. Think about that for a moment." Karen's cheeks flushed red as she avoided his gaze, clutching her dog's leash like a lifeline. "I didn't mean any harm," she mumbled weakly. "Didn't mean any harm?" Marcus echoed, his tone still calm but sharp. "You called the police on me because I didn't fit your idea of who belongs here. That's harm. You made assumptions about me based on nothing but my appearance, and you were ready to have me treated like a criminal." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Do you know how these situations usually end for someone like me? Do you understand the danger you put me in by making that call? all because you didn't like seeing me here." The park had grown quiet. A few joggers and dog walkers had stopped to watch the exchange, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Karen fidgeted under their stares, her composure unraveling. "I'm not here to humiliate you," Marcus said, softening his tone slightly. "But I need you to understand something. What you did today wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. And it happens to people like me every day. Think about the consequences of your actions next time." The officers, sensing that Marcus had said everything that needed to be said, stepped forward. "Ma'am," one of them said, gesturing toward the park's exit, "it's time for you to leave." Karen nodded quickly, her head down, and muttered something about needing to get home. Clutching her terrier tightly, she turned and walked away without another word. The image of her retreating figure was almost pitiful, her once commanding presence reduced to nothing more than a hurried shuffle. Marcus let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing as he watched her go. The officers turned back to Marcus. "Detective Reed," one of them said, his tone respectful, "we're sorry this happened to you. If there's anything you need from us, let us know." Marcus gave them a small nod. "I appreciate it," he said. "You handled this professionally, and that means a lot." The officers lingered for a moment before heading back to their patrol car. Marcus was left alone once more, the tension of the encounter slowly ebbing away. As Marcus sat back down on the bench, he glanced at the notebook he had left behind. The sketch of the pond was half finished, the lines soft and incomplete. Picking up his pen, he stared at the page, lost in thought. This wasn't the first time he had experienced something like this, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But what struck him most was how close the situation had come to spiraling out of control. If he hadn't revealed his badge, if the officers hadn't acted professionally, the outcome could have been very different. He thought about Karen, about her fear and her assumptions. Part of him hoped she would reflect on what had happened, that she would walk away from this encounter with a new perspective. But he also knew that change didn't happen overnight. For Marcus, though, the lesson was clear. He couldn't stop people from making assumptions, but he could control how he responded to them. And if his words today planted even the smallest seed of change, then the encounter had been worth it. As the day went on, news of the encounter spread through the park. Some of the bystanders who had witnessed it shared the story on social media, praising Marcus for his calm and measured response. Within days, the story gained traction, sparking conversations about bias, assumptions, and the importance of empathy. One post read, "We need more people like Detective Marcus Reed, calm, courageous, and willing to stand up for what's right. Today, I saw how one man's patience and dignity can make a difference." Karen's story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of making assumptions and acting on prejudice. Marcus didn't just defend himself. He used the moment to educate and inspire those around him, showing that kindness and dignity can triumph even in the face of ignorance. How often do we judge someone without knowing their story? How often do we let fear or bias cloud our better judgment? Let this story challenge us to do better, to think twice before we act, and to treat others with the respect they deserve. If Marcus's story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories Unfolded for more tales of resilience, justice, and unexpected twists. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And remember, empathy can change the world.